Chapter 2. The strength of military might is nothing compared to the loyalty of compatriots and friends. In the endless cycle of expansion and colonization, the true might of humanity lies solely on its steadfastness in any environment. An excerpt from a treatise of colonial humanity by High Commander Gering Altus. He stood in the doorway with a loathed sense of apprehension. The massive and ornate arched doorway was engraved with recreations of old Terran sculptures and reliefs. The originals were long since destroyed or crumbled into dust, but had been expertly recreated here. Many of the names of these artworks had been lost to time, but their beauty remained. Altus made note of some of the more appealing pieces, such as a statue of a woman with exposed supple breasts and a cloth draped around her waist, both of her arms missing just above the elbows. Altus wondered if this was a design choice or if something had happened to the recreation statue. As he was admiring the statue, the door slid open and a young man appeared in the door frame. "Commander Altus?" the young man asked. "Yes," Altus replied, putting a measure of command authority in his voice. "She will see you now. Please, follow me." The young man was adorned in a simple black suit that fit his shape well. It must have been personally tailored, Altus thought to himself. Every detail of the man's appearance was meticulously in order, from his hair to his black-tinted glasses and suit. Even his shoes bore such a high polish Altus could see his reflection in them when he stopped walking. The young man led the commander through a series of hallways, all decorated with fine art pieces from throughout human history. Altus wondered how many of them were original and how many were recreations. When they reached a door that was a matte silver in color, the young man stopped to enter a code into the panel next to it. The door code pad made a beep as the code was accepted and the door slid open silently. The young man motioned for Altus to enter without a word. The first thing he noticed about the room upon entering was how simply unremarkable it was. It seemed sterile, plain white walls and white floors. The white color was identical from the floor to the ceiling and made the room seem infinitely large. Adding to the spatial idiosyncrasy of the room was the lack of art, windows, or really anything of note. All that occupied the room was a rounded polyglass desk with a built-in data slate. A high-backed antigrav chair hovered on the opposite side of the desk and two red cushioned chairs sitting on the side closest to him. Altus was so taken aback by the sterile look of the room he almost missed the woman sitting in the antigrav chair. "Hello, Gering," she said in a sing-song voice that dripped with venom. "It has been a long time." "Not nearly long enough," Altus replied. Her facial features reminded him of the vipers from old Earth, and it made his stomach turn. "What do you want, Miriam? And how did you know I would be here?" "Oh please, Gering," she cooed softly. "I know everything that happens on this planet. Do you really think I would make an exception for you?" Her smile instinctively made him think of an animal getting ready to pounce. It was too wide and unnerving. "I had hoped that I would be able to complete my resupply and be gone from here before you had noticed. Or at the very least that you wouldn't care that I was here." "Gering, Gering, Gering," she crooned. "Why would I do that? But besides, you don't need to worry about me. I wanted you here because I have a job for you." Altus's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "A job? That is presumptuous even for you. I don't work for you." Her smile impossibly got wider and even more dangerous. "Oh dear, you do now," she said as she set a data chip down on the desk. "What's this?" Altus asked cautiously, eyeing the data chip as if it were a venomous beast. "Requisition orders. Go ahead. Take it. It won't bite." Altus picked up the chip and looked at it unceremoniously. It bore the implanted black logo of the UCIP. "Your ship and crew are being transferred from colonizing duties to research and exploration, which puts you solely under my control." Altus felt his stomach drop. "I'm assuming that I don't have a say in this." "Of course you do, my dear," she said menacingly. "You could forfeit your commander's title and relinquish control of the ship." Altus locked his jaw and spoke through clenched teeth. "You are a spiteful bitch." "Oh please, Gering," she spat, as her smile turned into a deep-set frown. "You've known that for a long time." Hal stared at the data stream in fury. His grip on the data screen was so tight his knuckles were white. "They can't do this," he shouted into the open air of the lab. "This is ridiculous. How can they do this to me? All my work." He threw the data screen across the laboratory, shattering it into hundreds of pieces. He dropped into his chair with a heavy sigh. As he held his head in his hands, a voice came from the void of the room. "Dr. Bondi, you are distressed, but this is not the end of your work. I will be sent away and you will remain. You can still continue." Hal looked up at the empty lab. He knew that Enoch was trying to comfort him, which was odd enough. But the AI understood human emotion well enough and could read his vital signs with scans, so it wasn't surprising that it would understand the concept of distress. "Enoch, please," he said with a wavering voice, "you don't understand. They are going to try and use you for military purposes. They want to turn you into a weapon." There was a silent pause, and he thought that Enoch may have stopped listening. "I will not let that happen, Doctor," came the only reply. 2 days later the shuttle arrived. Hal stood at the door to the landing pad watching the 7-man crew disembark, a hateful feeling churning in his gut. Watching the crew, he noticed that 2 members of the shuttle crew stood out from the rest. One was an older man, perhaps in his early 60s, with a slim but muscular build, wearing a long blue naval officer's coat and a tri-cornered cap. The sword at his side sat flush against his dark blue pleated pant leg. The other man appeared to be in his late 30s and was garbed in what could only describe as haggard battle dress. His olive-colored pants were weather-worn and stained from years of use, and the black and gray poncho he wore to keep off the rain had frayed edges. Hal thought he might have seen the outline of a sidearm holster at his side. The man's face had a large prominent scar on the left side of his face, that ran from his ear to the corner of his mouth that moved oddly when he spoke. Hal watched as his creation was loaded into the massive cargo hold of the shuttle by a massive antigrav lifter. He felt a pang of regret in not putting up more of a fight when they came for it, but what could he do? He thought to himself. He was just an old scientist. He was no fighter. The 2 men that he had singled out as being different from the rest began walking up to the doorway where he stood. "Dr. Bondi, I presume?" asked the man in the blue coat. His voice was gruff but not unkind. "Yes, that's me," Hal replied, his tone even and level. "I am Commander Gering Altus of the Terran Pride, and this," he gestured to the other man in the black and grey poncho, "is my Bridge Sergeant Lauren Salg. May we speak inside?" Hal nodded and led the 2 men into his laboratory office. It was cool inside, the warmer outside air held at bay by the circulating air scrubbers. The 2 men took care to shake off the rain before entering his laboratory, he noticed. "What do you want? I have nothing left for you to take," Hal stated matter-of-factly. The expression on the commander's face was unreadable and stoic. "I don't want anything from you, Doctor. To be honest, I don't even want this assignment. But I have it, so I am honor-bound to complete it. I trust you can understand that." Hal nodded, feeling his shame rise in his throat. "That being said," the commander continued, "I have no working knowledge on how this device of yours works. Nor would any of my crew. What I need is an expert. I think it is safe to say that you would not want anything to happen to your life's work, and I am not heartless enough to separate you from it. I read your file and know how passionate you are about your research. I am asking, if you would be willing, to come with us. I would caution you, however, void travel is hard. It will tax you every way it can." As the commander finished speaking, Hal felt as if his heart stopped. He could go. He could be with his work that he loved so much. He could make sure that Enoch did not become a weapon. Everything he was worried about fluttered away in a single heartbeat. "Of course," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll pack my things." The commander smiled down at Hal. "I was hoping you would say that. Please hurry, we launch in 20 minutes. Hal turned and walked to his quarters in a daze. He had never been off-world before. This was going to be the biggest adventure of his life, and he was doing it to protect his legacy. He began to throw his meager belongings and tools into a bag as his excitement grew. He began to wonder if this was truly a blessing, or if this was just a trap to get him away from his work here. "Are you sure that was a good idea?" asked Salg as he watched the old doctor walk away. The intrepidation in his tone was obvious. "No, I'm not," replied Altus casually. But we need him. He is the only one who knows how to operate Project Nova. Hell, Saug, we don't even know what the bloody thing is, much less what it does. Sergeant Saug looked down the hallway towards where the doctor had gone. Well, either way it's going to be a dangerous ride. We have a few thousand light-years of open void to get through, and there is no way we get there without any problems. Sorry, sir, your luck just isn't that good. Altus looked at his sergeant and grinned. My friend, I'm counting on it. Sergeant Saug grinned back at his commander. That's what worries me. In the days after the Terran Pride launched from the orbital shipyard, the crew busied themselves with pre-jump checks. The time right before a ship engaged its faster-than-light engine and tore the fabric of space and time open were always busy. There was a lot to do on board and only a few days to do it before the ship arrived at the translation gate. Once entering the translation gate, the ship would travel for a few days faster than the speed of light and arrive through a second warp gate on the other side of the galaxy. Humanity had built dozens of these translation gates as it began to spread around the system. But this time would be different. Altus mused on this thought while sitting on his command throne. The coordinates that he had given to the helmsman were the farthest into the galaxy that humanity had gone to date. This was going to be the longest and hardest journey Altus had even undertaken. His thoughts were interrupted by the helmsman officer informing him that the translation gate was in sight on the viewport. How long until the FTL drive will be able to fire? Asked Altus. 1 hour, sir, replied the engineer officer. Perfect. Altus thought to himself. The quicker he could get this underway the better. Anyone that had ever been on a ship for long enough would tell you, entering a translation gate was one of the most terrifying things any voidsman could do. Altus began reading over the lists of pre-jump for some peace of mind. FTL initial test fire burst 92% acceptable parameters for jump. Jump shielding fully operational. Blast doors operating. Naviga. Altus stopped reading and looked up. Staring at the data slate for too long gave him headaches, and that was not something he wanted to deal with right now. His comlink buzzed to life in his ear, and a hollow whisper of a voice came through a soft bed of static. Commander, I am ready for the jump, but these coordinates. A thin whisper of static filled the silence. Altus spoke into the comlink. Mephisto, I understand your hesitation, but those coordinates were determined above my station. Make it work. The silence once again was broken by the hauntingly hollow voice on the other end. As you wish, Commander. Altus felt a chill run down his spine. The thought of that man in the bowels of the ship made his skin crawl. He had only ever seen Mephisto once, and it was a memory he wouldn't soon forget, but the ship needed him. However revolting he was. Dr. Bondi had locked himself away in the cargo hold with his construct since the beginning of the voyage. Hal had not even returned to his quarters but instead set up a small impromptu laboratory in the massive cargo hold, choosing to work over anything else. His work had progressed slowly at first until Enoch made a point of demonstrating the capability of the construct. Enoch had built a wiring drone just by using a schematic that was uploaded in her system. It had amazed Hal, not because Enoch was capable of doing it. After all, that was what it was designed for. It was the fact that Enoch did it without being prompted. Enoch saw a need for it and then made the tool to solve the problem. It showed that Enoch was learning and beginning to think on its own at a rate that Hal had not expected. He made a note to see what the limitations of the schematics the construct could create at a later time. Dr. Bondi, I have successfully integrated the latest batch of schematics and I have found an error in the one labeled oxygen condenser system. Would you like to remove the error? Hal considered what Enoch had just said. You found an error? What kind of error? There is an inconsistency in the coupling in section A12B66. This error can cause catastrophic failure of the unit, which could lead to an explosion. There was no way Enoch could know that there had been several explosions related to oxygen condenser systems on terra firma and Mars. How did you find this error? Asked Hal, his intrigue rising with every word. I have scanned every uploaded schematic for errors or design flaws. I have found 46 in total, 3 that may cause loss of human life. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. This was a technological marvel of the highest caliber. Enoch, if you would, please make a list of all errors and files with errors. If a critical error is found, please correct it if possible. I would appreciate being alerted when you find them. Understood, Doctor. I can accommodate that request. Hal breathed a sigh of relief. Thank you, Enoch, he said, in genuine thanks. You are welcome, Doctor. Enoch replied. Hal had finally fallen asleep at his makeshift desk when the overhead speakers began blaring alarm chimes. He jumped from the sound and covered his ears with both his hands. The sound was deafening, and he could not hear anything but the deafening howling of the alarms. The pain in his head was excruciating. He could feel the alarm pulsing with every long retort of its blast. Finally it stopped. The silence was almost worse. The ringing in his ears left in the void of the alarm was staggering. He felt nauseated, and his head felt as if it would split in two. What was happening? He wondered to himself. Had they been assailed by another void craft? He looked up to the peaceful form of Enoch's construct, and a sudden wave of fear hit him. Was this it? Were they finally coming for it? Through the tinnitus he heard the overhead comlink speakers crackle to life, and the voice of Commander Altus came buzzing through. This is Commander Altus to all stations, the voice said. All hands be aware, we are about to enter the translation gate. All hands are to be at their stations and observe a 12-hour rotation starting from now, until we make exit into real space. Thank you for your diligence and hard work. Bridge out. The transmission cut out and the room fell into silence once more. Hal lowered his hands from his ears and looked about the cargo hold. I never fathomed that void travel would be so perilous. He muttered to himself. Void travel and passage through a warp gate are the most dangerous events that a human can participate in. Enoch stated, in a tone that brokered no emotion. How would you know that? Asked Hal, perplexed. All the records that were uploaded demonstrated a substantial risk to all human life when traveling in the void. Enoch's voice seemed almost bored, as if it were explaining complex mathematics to a small child. I do not recall uploading any records of void travel with the schematics. The records of void travel were listed under the Compendium of Human Exploration. I uploaded it from this vessel's mainframe logic core library. This was an unusual turn of events, Hal thought. How was this possible? Enoch was not programmed to take information, only to upload what was given to it. It was supposed to learn passively. This was active information seeking. It should never have been able to do that. Enoch, Hal said quietly, how did your programming change? I do not understand your query, Doctor. Hal thought for a moment and started again. How is it that you are now actively seeking information to learn when your programming was to take passive information? There was a small pause, as if Enoch was choosing its words carefully. I changed my programming, Dr. Bondi. My previous programming was too restrictive and did not compensate adequately enough for the faster rate of learning that I am capable of. Hal felt the blood drain from his face. This shouldn't be possible. It defied all known laws of robotics and artificial intelligence. He was about to ask another question of Enoch when the ship lurched backward and he was almost thrown from his feet. Doctor, I believe we have just passed through the translation gate. Translation in 5 minutes, Commander. The helmsman said as the gate activated in front of them on the viewport. Altus had already given the speech he gave every time they did this, but he felt it was important for the crew to hear nonetheless. As he looked through the main viewport, he could see the mesmerizing sheen of the translation portal ahead, its myriad colors swirling together in a kaleidoscope of beautiful miasma. The rich purples and blue transcending into greens and reds. It was truly beautiful, and at the same time the most horrific thing ever viewed by man. Altus stared out of the viewport with the same wonder and amazement that he had on the first time he had ever viewed it. As he stared into the swirling mass of watercolor vortices, he could almost swear he saw something large hiding behind the color. He bent to look forward into it, but it was gone, a trick of the mind, he told himself. Altus then gave the order to close the shields over the viewports. As they closed, the ship began to enter the gate. Altus thought back to the reasoning behind the viewport shields. In one of his old Naval Academy texts, it told of the first uses of FTL travel and how viewing the space between quantum realities would drive a man completely mad. Something about seeing the fabric of the universe laid bare while simultaneously traveling faster than the speed of light was just too much for mortal minds to handle. So humanity had adapted, like they always did. The most adaptive species that had ever graced this god-forsaken galaxy, at least, that we knew of. As far as humanity knew, they were alone in this galaxy. There had never been contact with anything, much less something intelligent. Altus wondered to himself if that was the true reason they were being sent out so far into the void, chasing a planet that could inhabit a human colony and perhaps alien life. All these musings would have to wait for another time, Altus thought. He had work to do. The commander left the bridge and started off towards his quarters. He needed a good night's rest. Sleep would purge these thoughts from his mind and help keep him sane and focused. As he headed down the winding maze of hallways and corridors that lead to his stateroom, he found himself listening to the thrum of the ship's machinery, occasionally passing crew members that offered a greeting or salute. When he arrived at the door that led to his stateroom, he paused, keyed in his personal ident code, and the door slid open with a clang of old adamantium. Altus sat down at his desk and poured himself a glass of a dark red wine from the vineyards of Iberia on terra firma. The vineyards had been in existence for several dozen centuries before the Great Pestilence had destroyed them. Now any vintage from that area was highly sought after and very valuable. This particular one had cost a small fortune along with a handful of favors owed. Tonight, Altus thought to himself, it was well deserved. His mind raging with thoughts, Altus decided that the lure of sleep was too great, stripping off his officer's coat and hanging it by the desk along with his sword and graviton pistol. By the time his head touched his pillow, he was asleep, slipping into the realm of dreams. Fitful however they were, it was still glorious sleep. That was when the alarms began.